right. Hi, you guys. I'm here again with Jason Reza Jorjani. He just wrote this amazing book called Close Encounters. You have to read it. If you care at all about anything, you have to read it, basically. But particularly if you care at all about the UFO phenomenon or what's going on with our reality, you need to read it. Like, seriously, it's that good. So, hey, Jason.
It's great to be with you again, Nikki.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about in this book, but okay. First of all, real quick, let's get this out of the way. Why Jack Parsons? Why did you dedicate it to Jack Parsons?
You really jump to the chase, don't you? I mean, you're asking me like the most esoteric question about the book up front, but okay. All right, I'll tell you why. So in chapter 6 of this book, which is about the relationship between UFOs and revealed religion, I talk about something called the Collins elite. There was a group that was formed, okay, let me put it to you this way. It's believed that this group was formed in 1947 to deal with the Roswell crash. And, you know, there's all this, there's this narrative about MJ-12, about a secret interagency group consisting of people with various areas of expertise who were brought together to analyze the wreckage at Roswell and to try to decipher what was going on with the close encounter phenomenon, right? And, you know, in the 1980s, really, the story about MJ-12 took off when those supposedly top secret documents were leaked to some journalist who then published them. And over the years, more and more of these alleged MJ-12 documents have surfaced. And they paint a picture of, well, I mean, at least a dozen people. That's what the 12 refers to. And some people have suggested that MJ stands for member of Jason. Jason is a military industrial think tank that brings together scientists from various disciplines. And one of the suggestions is that MJ stands for member of Jason, and it was the top 12 people in the organization who constituted this working group. Other people say that MJ-12 is short for Majestic 12, and that this thing was called Operation Majestic 12. Anyway, there's a whole mythology that's built up around that.
Right.
And one thing that I suggest in this book is that perhaps, and I'm not the first person to suggest this, that perhaps the whole MJ-12 thing is a disinformation operation. That some group did exist which addressed the Roswell crash and, you know, the other significant close encounters that the US government started to have, that the Air Force and so forth started to have in 1946, 47. But that the actual group was of a different character than this purported MJ-12. And in particular, there's some research that's been done by Nick Redfern and others that indicates that this group was an informal organization. It wasn't an actual funded branch of any department of the US government. It was an informal working group bringing together people from naval intelligence, from the Air Force, from the CIA, and so forth. And it was loosely or casually referred to as the Collins elite. And now it's believed that this group was brought together and given authorization by the president in 1947 to deal with Roswell. But when you dig deeper into the story of the Collins elite, you see that what actually happened was there was a group that had been formed to spy on Jack Parsons and his activities at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Because of course, Jack Parsons had a high-level security clearance. He was designing rockets for the US military during the Second World War, competing with people like Wernher von Braun in Germany. And yet the same Jack Parsons was involved with the Thelema cult of Aleister Crowley. And so, you know, understandably, people in the Pentagon who had given this guy clearance and who were funding his work at JPL, wanted to know what kind of, quote unquote, satanic black magic this guy was involved with and whether he potentially presented a security threat to the US government. So they had this group already formed, basically of spies working to assess any potential threat from Jack Parsons. And when Jack Parsons blew himself up in his laboratory, this group was more formalized, and they were tasked with going through all of his private papers and figuring out what the connection was between his more exoteric technological innovative work and his more esoteric activities with Thelema, the Thelema group. And okay, so here's where it gets really weird. When Roswell happened and they started to look at the kind of debris left on that field and to analyze the cadavers that they found, it occurred to them, to the people who were first on the scene there from the Air Force and various intelligence agencies, that whatever was going on with this wreckage at Roswell was somehow connected to the conjuring that Parsons was attempting to carry out in the desert with people like L. Ron Hubbard.
Like when they got, okay.
Aleister Crowley had drawn a picture of this egregore, this tulpa, lamb, that he was trying to summon. Some interdimensional being or star being that Aleister Crowley was trying to open up a portal for so that it could enter this world.
Yeah, it looked like a little gray, but had slant tear eyes.
It's a very interesting image because, first of all, it looks like a gray, but then it's like one of these duck rabbit images, that depending on how you think about it, it changes what you see. You see the face of something like a gray in it, but then it also looks like the head of an owl. If you think of an owl and you look at that image, you see that there's another aspect that emerges, which is the face of an owl. And one of the things I talk about in this book is the shape-shifting of grays into owls and vice versa. So in any case, Jack Parsons had been continuing this work of Aleister Crowley to summon these beings. And in particular, he'd been doing so in the western desert of the United States. And this group that was tasked with spying on Parsons and then piecing together what Parsons was really involved with after Parsons blew himself up, round about the time of Roswell, this is the group that was assigned ultimately to study Roswell, because the people first on the scene came to the conclusion that the pieces of hardware left there had more in common with alchemy than they did with modern industrial manufacturing. And that even like the symbols that were there on the I-beams and so forth that were discovered at Roswell were some kind of alchemical, or esoteric symbolism. So this Collins elite was formed, and I make the argument in the 6th chapter of my book that, and we can unpack various elements of this if you're interested in going there, but this Collins elite, I think pretty quickly, by 1960 or so, looked at the whole religious history of mankind, particularly the revealed religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and came to the conclusion that these same beings that the Air Force was encountering were responsible for reshaping the fundamental religious outlook of human societies throughout the course of history, and that incidents involving angels communicating with prophets and demonstrating these awe-inspiring miracles in antiquity, like the parting of the Red Sea, or the use of the Ark of the Covenant to bring down the walls of Jericho, or the events surrounding the preaching and the death and resurrection of Jesus. These were all connected to the UFO phenomenon. And the Collins elite came to believe that it was in a position of responsibility for holding back the apocalypse, that if the Collins elite were to advise the US government that they should come clean about the nature of close encounters, they would in effect be pulling a tripwire that would initiate the apocalypse. That this phenomenon is of a piece with everything that's occurred in biblical history, and that full disclosure of the intelligence behind close encounters would effectively mean the opening up of the book of Revelations. It would mean the unfolding of the final events in eschatological history. And so I think these people may have initially started out with a relatively skeptical, relatively secular mindset, but being from a Christian background, like most people in America, eventually they came to believe that they were somehow endowed with a divine mission to protect mankind from the advent of the Antichrist and the unfolding of the final events that are recounted in biblical scripture.
So you quote Vallée as saying disclosure could only come from the same organizations that are in large of the security brief itself, and those organizations have their own agenda and constraints, which may be regrettably more possibly legitimate. So is this what and I was, in my note to you was going to be like, well, like what could be the actual legitimate reason for keeping it hidden? And I guess you just answered that, like they like literally thought that it would bring about the apocalypse in some sort of way.
Well, it kind of will. I mean, think about it, Nikki. Let me lay out a number of reasons why. Although I am vehemently opposed to these people, I can understand their rationale, okay? Because think about it this way. First of all, the entire history of close encounters in the modern era suggests that the beings that are engaging us are telepathic, and that they're also capable of psychokinesis, and they're connected to displays of psychokinesis on the part of contactees, right? So people like George Adamski, George Hunt Williamson, all these individuals who claim to be in contact with quote unquote Venusians, they all said that these beings are telepathic, and they claim to be receiving telepathic communications from them. Meanwhile, people like Ted Owens, the psychokinetic adept, who claimed to, be capable of starting forest fires with his mind. He caused crashes of civilian airliners. He even claimed to be targeting nuclear power plants at one point using psychokinesis. This guy, Ted Owens, claimed that he was getting his psychokinetic powers from his contact with quote unquote space intelligences. Mm. So just before we go any further, let's pause and contemplate that, right? Any integration of our society with the society that's behind close encounters would mean a recognition of humanity's telepathic and psychokinetic abilities. That by itself is apocalyptic. Can you imagine the consequences if it were to be acknowledged by the scientific establishment that ESP is trainable and PK is trainable, and we'll wind up living in a society where, with the same level of commitment and dedication that it takes to learn a martial art, you can go train your innate psi ability, which has been suppressed on a large scale in our culture. You can go train your innate psi ability, and sure, you could use it for all kinds of wonderful things, right? But I mean, what's the track record of, you know, that you're going to have people spying on the inner thoughts and intentions of others whose privacy will wind up being violated as a result. You'll have people, even unconsciously, using psychokinesis to take vengeance on people who have crossed them in some way. And what kind of a legal system is going to be able to handle complaints from a person who claims that their house was burned down by psychokinesis, or that someone used PK to give them a heart attack or a stroke? Right? I mean, okay, it would be an utter nightmare.
But do you think that it's like we're a Boeing 737 without one lesson, so we don't know how to pilot our own machinery? Or do you think that it's like there's the contact phenomenon itself gives you the missing element? If we were given some sort of it's almost like you had to acquire an implant or whatever it is that makes it to where the machinery of the human works this way. Like, what do you think is that?
Yeah, I think it's more the former, but the two can't be, sharply distinguished from one another, because like in my writings, I've developed this idea of how a spectral revolution is inextricable from the technological singularity. There will come a time in our trajectory of technological development, like, you know, when we're on the verge of really engineering artificial intelligence, for example, that our material sciences and our most tangible projects of technological engineering will have to grapple with these psi abilities, right? Because, for example, you're not going to be able to artificially engineer intelligent consciousness without doing so, without understanding ESP and PK, right? And so you'll wind up with a kind of science and technology that totally incorporates psi. Well, the beings who are piloting the UFOs already have that. So if we were to integrate our society with theirs or have any kind of open contact with them, we would wind up being apprised of that level of scientific knowledge and quickly develop that technological capability, which means that, and by technological, I mean not just like machinery, but technique, techne in the ancient Greek sense. And so psi as a techne would follow from any disclosure and, you know, open communication with the intelligence behind the UFO phenomenon. So that's, I think, one primary reason why actually full disclosure would be apocalyptic. Another reason, though, beyond that, is that, you know, it's pretty clear to me, and I think I make a good case for it in this book, in chapter 6, which could almost be a book in its own right. It's about 100 pages, chapter 6.
Yeah.
That what we're seeing in the Bible, from the story of the fallen angels interbreeding with humans, to the Tower of Babel, to you know, Moses and the Israelites being guided through the desert by a cylindrical UFO that parts the Red Sea, to the coordination with the celestial army of the Lord for the sacking of Jericho and the genocide of its population, to the tens of UFOs described by Ezekiel in the book of Ezekiel, all the way up to and including the mission of prophetic mission of Jesus, where, you know, he's pulled up out of the Jordan River into a UFO and taken out into the desert, where, you know, there's a UFO present at the so-called transfiguration scene. They described it as a transfiguration because he had the halo of a bright UFO behind him, inside of which was Moses, who had apparently survived for all that time, and Elijah. And his disciples supposedly met Moses and Elijah coming out of this object on the mount where there's this so-called transfiguration. Then it also appears that the beings from these UFOs were involved in his resurrection. They roll the rock at the mouth of his tomb aside, and two of these, I mean, Nordics, like, you know, like the people that Adamski engaged with, go into the tomb and they basically help Jesus out. He's like leaning on the two of them, and the centurions are terrified and go back and give Pilate a report about it, right? And then Jesus is basically taken up into their craft. This is the so-called ascension. What do you think is going to happen if you tell, and you know, this goes, by the way, all through the rest of history too, all the way up to the early 1900s with Fatima, you know, the miracle of Fatima that was recognized by the Catholic Church. The whole Fatima miracle that these little girls, you know, reported back to the church about was a close encounter phenomenon. And so what do you think is going to happen if you tell a predominantly Judeo-Christian society that their entire religious history was shaped by beings who are currently abducting people out of their homes in the middle of the night, implanting them and their children, carrying out illicit hybridizations against people's will, and who are also responsible for grotesque cattle mutilations?
Good points, good points. But okay, like, so where do you distinguish the difference between, I guess we should just real quick talk to people about, like, you're the 6 things that you say that they're, okay, the UFOs are not, you know, Alpha Centaurians coming from this star over here. I mean, like, there's something else going on. And so you talk about the other, we could be living in a simulation, which you have a way of explaining that more, time travel, and like there's a lot of different elements to this. Okay, so let's talk about the time traveling Nordics versus the trickster. Like, where do you see, like, what is their relationship to the trickster?
So the first thing I want to say with respect to that is that it's good if we endeavor not to repeat ourselves. We had a long conversation about the time travel interpretation of UFOs and the genesis of the Nordic breakaway civilization, as I call it in this book. And so the first thing is that I would refer people back to our earlier conversation.
Yeah.
And definitely folks listening to this, I think should probably go back and watch that and then come back to this conversation. Because I think it's best if I just try to summarize and encapsulate that whole aspect of the close encounter phenomenon. And then maybe we lay a little bit more emphasis on this trickster that I suggest has an adversarial relationship with these time travelers.
Right.
So in a nutshell, what I argue is that there's an alternative physics model to the one that's accepted by the scientific establishment. And it's been secreted away by an economic and political elite since the 1890s. And it's an ether model of how the cosmos is structured. And it's in fact the physics model that Nikola Tesla was working with when he proposed world wireless transfer of energy. And a lot of people don't know that Tesla was also working on developing airships that were electrogravitic and that would be integrated, they would be integrated into this global wireless power system. And you can see the drawings for these airships in his sketches of the world wireless system. And so I think that Tesla was paralleling work that had reached a more advanced stage secretly in an elite group of Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Germanic people who were connected to high finance, who were connected to cutting-edge scientific research, and that basically in a period from the 1890s, when we had the mass airship sightings in the United States, all the way to the 1940s, when the Germans were working on saucer-shaped airframes and working on developing zero-point energy. In that span, from the 1890s to the 1940s, time travel technology was achieved based on this alternative physics model. And the people who achieved time travel technology, if you go back and look at their project papers, their policy proposals, the institutions that they set up, like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, and so forth, these people were ardent eugenicists, and their explicitly stated purpose was the creation of, quote, a Nordic master race, unquote. This is what they were after. So I suggest in my book that they achieved it. And by marrying the idea of the eugenic cultivation of a Nordic master race with the capabilities that were afforded to them by their achievement of zero-point energy, they developed a breakaway civilization. And this breakaway civilization inserted itself deep into not just the human past, deep into the geological and cosmological past of our solar system. And in particular, my claim, looking at the archaeological evidence on Mars, looking at the radiological analysis on Mars by Dr. John Brandenburg, is that they chose a living Mars circa 250 million, 300 million years before the present as a kind of, how can I put it, like a quarantine zone or temporal bubble, a place that would be safe for them to base themselves so that they could very carefully manipulate the variables of the timeline of human history, right?
Right,
Without
so that the grandfather paradox wasn't completely to where they weren't born.
Exactly. They needed a safe haven to operate from out of. And that would be a place and a time before humanity even existed, and a place where there were conditions like Earth, which would be the only other place in our solar system would be Mars, right? It's very convenient because you can get from Mars to Earth very quickly. And that's where the extraterrestrial hypothesis is correct. These are extraterrestrials in the sense that they long inhabited Mars, and they had a civilization on Mars. They still, I believe, have underground facilities on Mars. And insofar as they're going back and forth between Mars and the Earth-Moon system, they are extraterrestrials, technically speaking, right? But they're also time travelers. And so the thesis in this book, to go back to how you formulated that question, the core thesis really in this book, there are many theses, but the most central one is that these Nordic time travelers have put us in a fifth dimensional prison. They have some fixed ideas about what a perfect human society would look like. And they believe that they've achieved it, that they've created utopia. And using this time traveling technology, they've set themselves up as gods over the rest of humanity. Which, I mean, if you think about it, really, it makes sense. It's very easy to understand. Looking at mass human psychology and looking at the potential for time travel technology, how the first group of time travelers would be seduced into setting themselves up as overlords over the rest of humanity. Not overlords simply in 3 or 4 dimensions, but overlords fifth dimensionally, right? Because at the point where you achieve time travel, history isn't a line for you anymore. Human history gets bent into the event horizon of something like a black hole. And you're like on that rim looking down into the whole of human history. And so you're in a vantage point with respect to the rest of humanity throughout the course of time, where then you can manipulate people like puppets in a stage play, or at least you can try to. And so with some fixed ideas about, you know, the relationship between the macrocosm of cosmic order and the microcosm of what a perfect society should look like, these people have basically ensconced us inside inside a type of society that I think represents an evolutionary dead end. They've closed off the possibilities for further human evolution on account of believing that their conception of the end of history is the right one. And
is this why you think that maybe they are in a prison, but we aren't?
We're in the prison that they've created for themselves by virtue of the fact that they see us as a kind of slave population. But I think that, and you know, it'll take time to unpack this, that the trickster that's engaging them in an adversarial fashion does not see us necessarily as prisoners. It is trying to contain them, and it's trying to free up our evolutionary possibilities, to get us out from under these overlords so that we can pursue our own destiny, and that we can, you know, make discoveries, and you know, we can engage in innovations, not just technically, but on a cultural level, that these people have closed off to themselves with their, you know, sterile idea of what human perfection would mean.
Okay, so I need to be a little bit more clear about these people in terms of the Nordics. Okay, so are these the same actual people that were at the origin of the time travel invention, like the 1940s? Or are they like the future generations of them coming back? Like are they immortal and the vampiric element to it? Which one?
So I think the latter more so. Although, and here's where it gets really convoluted. Think about it. We would be, if time travel were invented sometime between the 1890s and the 1940s, right? Certainly by around 1950, with something like Project Kronos with the bell that was designed in Prague. If that were the case, at any time thereafter, we would be receiving time travelers at every stage in their developmental trajectory, from okay, and here the lining up the time frames gets convoluted, but to simplify it, from 1950s Argentina, where they're working with this technology, we would be getting time travelers. Let's say the Nordics that were talking to Adamski.
Okay.
From Mars, 250 million years before the present, once they finally set up a civilization there from their own temporal standpoint, we would be getting time travelers. From Atlantis, 12,000 years before the present, which was a colony of theirs initially, we would be getting time travelers. So time travel, and this is what makes the whole phenomenon so convoluted, and it makes the phenomenology of these Nordics that are engaging us so variegated. It's, you know, this is why we get all kinds of Nordics, and they appear in various ways, because I think they're coming from all kinds of different points in the developmental trajectory of their time traveling breakaway civilization. Anywhere from, you know, the 1950s to Mars in the, you know, vast cosmological past of our solar system to, you know, Atlantis. And so yeah. And then in terms of the question of how long-lived they are, we ourselves are 30 years away from the kind of genetic engineering technology that would allow us to extend our lifespan by hundreds of years, potentially. And so I think it's safe to say that they already have that technology. And, you know, as I suggested earlier, they also have psychic abilities that may bear on an extension of lifespan and on, let's say, a transfer of consciousness from a person to his clone, right? I mean, like, if we see gods, like, think about the ancient Greeks and how, you know, they would receive visitations from Apollo over the course of, I don't know, thousands of years, right? If Apollo looks the same, you know, 2,000, 3,000 years later, as he did to the people who encountered him earlier, well, it could be that his lifespan has been genetically engineered to be much longer than ours, but it could also be that
He's just time
this
travel.
is a person who's capable of transferring his consciousness into a clone body any number of times. And so, yes, I think they have that kind of technology. Again, technology that we ourselves are not that far from achieving right now, which is one of the reasons why I think that we saw this UAP report and why the United States government is changing its tune, because they know that we are close to a technological singularity that may give us technological parity with these beings. And these beings are not going to allow us to get to that point because it will challenge their authority. So disclosure is going to be forced onto the US government and onto the other governments of the world, not by their own volition, but from the side of the phenomenon. And so I think that they're starting to gear up for that and to position themselves to be able to manage that in a way that's beneficial to the elites that have coveted this information for decades.
Okay, so then do you sort of think that, like, the fabric of reality that is the computational bit, like the whatever the, not simulation, but simulacrum, like the computational cosmos that holds us, do you think it's like it sends the trickster as a way to not be so boring, like as if like this utopian view, like it's almost like they've hacked the system and it's like, I don't like that. Let's fuck with them. Like, is that, do you think what's kind of going on in a way?
Yes. So I think that if you contemplate the nature of the most advanced consciousness that's conceivable in the cosmos, you would arrive at the conclusion that it would have one categorical imperative. Kant used this term, categorical imperative, in his philosophical work, meaning the principle or maxim that organizes all other ethics and that determines the aims of all actions, right? It's the one fundamentally determinative objective or aim, the categorical imperative. And so I think if you try to formulate what would be the categorical imperative of the most advanced consciousness that we can at least conceive of, right? It would be infinite creativity. That would be the categorical imperative of the most advanced consciousness conceivable in the cosmos.
Mhm.
Because such a being will have seen so much, experienced so much, and engaged in so many machinations involving various societies and different, epochs of cosmological time, that in order to keep itself alive, so as not to face a kind of existential despair and suicidal nihilism, this consciousness would need to be not just entertained, but inspired and engaged by configurations of existence that it itself could not have conceived of, right? So it craves novelty. And because it wants new experiences, because otherwise it faces an existential threat to itself. It's not doing this out of the goodness of its heart.
Right.
It's an evolutionary function.
That makes sense.
And yeah, so what I suggest in this book is that a superorganism, probably based in Earth's oceans in the far future of our geological history, is engaging with this cosmic intelligence, or is embodying this cosmic intelligence. It's operating on the higher dimensional level, higher reference level inside the computational system of the cosmos, that affords it either access to this cosmic intelligence or allows it to embody this cosmic intelligence. And that superorganism from the geological future of Earth is reaching back into our past and into our present through hyperdimensional vortices in places like the Bermuda Triangle.
Or
right? So
Ranch.
think about it, like UFOs are time machines, right? What do? They warp space-time. This is why there are all these temporal anomalies in various places, and I go through them in my book. There are like at least 54 places in the United States you can identify where people go missing into temporal anomalies. They're very much like the Bermuda Triangle.
Missing 411.
David Politis' work, Missing 411. Utterly bizarre cases of people who go missing in different times, sometimes make it back, sometimes only their things make it back without them. And I think these same people are leaving anomalous objects in the geological record when they wind up, let's say, slipping back into the time of the dinosaurs and leaving human footprints next to dinosaur footprints that are then interpreted as evidence for, the Earth only being 5,000 years old by these idiot religious fundamentalists. So you have these hyperdimensional vortices. And what I suggest in this book is that if we're living on a planet where 70% of its surface area consists of the oceans, and we've only explored 5% of those oceans for some bizarre reason, well, and half of UFOs are seen entering and exiting oceans, it stands to reason that the majority of these hyperdimensional vortices are in the oceans, not on land. And we already see how many of them are on land from David Politis' research, right? So the ocean is probably full of these hyperdimensional vortices. And if something can slip backwards in time and leave some body can slip backwards and leave anomalous artifacts in the past, or beings from the past can slip into our time, like all these cryptids,
like Bigfoot or whatever. Yeah.
Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and extinct avian.
Yeah, like a lot of people are seeing pterodactyl.
John Keel in his research goes into like pterodactyl. Exactly. And so, and by the way, I think that it's not incidental that the dinosaurs that people see are mostly avian dinosaurs or aquatic dinosaurs, because think about it. The surface of the Earth shifts a lot over time. As the continents have separated, the surface of the Earth gets layered over with various new strata.
Yeah.
It's easier to imagine how a dinosaur who's in water or a dinosaur flying through the air would be able to slip through one of these hyperdimensional vortices more than a land-based dinosaur. In any case, my argument is if we have cryptids coming to the present from the past, if we have humans slipping through hyperdimensional vortices back into the period of the dinosaurs and leaving, footprints and artifacts and so forth there, why wouldn't we believe that there are things coming here from the future through the same vortices? And my suggestion is, taking the octopus as a point of departure, that some superorganism from the future has come here with access to the, cosmic intelligence that can really program our quantum computational universe. And that superorganism is engaging in some kind of a deconstructive enterprise with this breakaway civilization. That superorganism wants to break down the rigid social structure that these overlords have set up, on a fifth dimensional level, and that they're using to trap us and to deny us our evolutionary possibilities. And, one reason for that could be that the superintelligence is actually somehow humanity in the future, that we mutate into it, we evolve into it in some way, biologically, technologically, psychically. Or it could be that this thing inhabits Earth's oceans in the future, and so it's concerned about the ecosystem of Earth because this is its planet, and it's worried what humanity might do to itself and to the planet if this breakaway civilization isn't broken down and human society isn't allowed to restructure itself in a more constructive fashion, right? So yeah, I go into, in the last chapter of this book, various manifestations of the close encounter phenomenon, various aspects of the close encounter phenomenon that I think are manifestations of this trickster-minded superorganism, rather than any machinations on the part of the time-traveling breakaway civilization.
Perfect. I love that. Yeah. So, and you also go into like the Lucifer trickster. I think that one's kind of interesting. Okay, what do you think? Who are the Titans?
A dissident faction of the breakaway civilization.
Okay.
So now here, okay, I was about to say now here it's going to get a little odd, as if all of this hasn't been utterly bizarre to the average person so far.
Too late. Go for it.
If you go back to the 1930s, right? If you go back to the 1930s, not even the 1930s, go back to the 19-teens, and you look at the matrix for the rise of fascism. Because here we're dealing with this Nordic elite, right? This elite that wants to, it's got a lot of economic resources. They're in high finance. They've got people like J.P. Morgan, John Rockefeller, the Carnegies, Ford, and so forth, financing them, right? They've also got, top technological research institutions, both in the Americas and in Germany, working on their projects. If you go back to that whole matrix for the rise of the military-industrial complex of Nazi Germany, you see that there were two different types of people really involved in it. And this is lost on people on the left who want to, paint everybody on the far right with a single broad brushstroke as a quote-unquote fascist, right? Fascism is not a coherent political ideology. If you really study fascism, you see that there are two kinds of fascists, and they're fundamentally opposed to one another. And they only really had an alliance of convenience for a certain period of time. You've got quote-unquote fascists who are traditionalists. They believe in the perennial philosophy. They believe there's an eternal wisdom, and there's a certain perfect way that society should be organized that reflects the cosmic order, right? So there's a Sanskrit concept, rata, cosmic order, and it's governed by Brahman, and the devas, the gods, have as their purpose the alignment of the microcosm of human life with the macrocosm of the cosmic order. And this cosmic order does not evolve. It's perfect. It's eternal. And all that happens over the course of history is that a society that's properly organized decays and degenerates over time. So you go from a golden age to a silver age to a bronze age to a dark age. You go from the Satya Yuga to the Kali Yuga. It's a cyclical conception of history that's degenerative. And once you're in the Kali Yuga, once the Kali Yuga culminates, the forces of deterioration, decay, degeneracy culminate, the gods come down and they refound a new Satya Yuga, a new golden age. Okay? So you had traditionalists who believed in this, who we call fascists. And then you had another group of people who are radical futurists. They believe in a progressive teleological conception of history, where our best days are ahead of us. We are always, even if it's a spiral, not a line, it's an upward spiral. We're always advancing and improving. And these were people like F.T. Marinetti, the Italian futurists, for example, who worked very closely with Benito Mussolini in the beginning before later they had a falling out. And I think that some of the people who were working on, say, Project Kronos in Prague, in Nazi-occupied Prague, were very much these futurist-minded people who were working on projects like the Bell. And so you have this very unsteady marriage of convenience between these futurists and these traditionalists to create this incoherent phenomenon that we call fascism. And what I would argue is that once the elite of this fascist project became this time-traveling breakaway civilization, the futurists turned on the traditionalists. And there was this bifurcation between the gods, the devas, the Olympians, and the titans or the asuras on the other hand. And the asuras began to wage a kind of rebellion and war of resistance against the devas. And here is where I think we get the imagery in the Bible of the fallen angels from. The idea that a group of these Elohim, to put it in Hebrew rather than Sanskrit, a group of these Elohim broke away, came down to earth, and started to try to raise the level of consciousness and technical development of the human population so that we would be able to determine our own trajectory, right? And I think that the myth of Prometheus fits into this context, that Prometheus, the bringer of the fire, of the forge of technological development, and the bringer of the light of science and knowledge amidst the imposed darkness of this Olympian world order, this imposed ignorance that the Olympians are responsible for. The Prometheus figure, like Enki in the Mesopotamian myths, like Quetzalcoatl in the Mayan myths, is a titan who is engaged in a rebellion against the gods who want to create a traditionalist, perennialist society on the earth where nothing ever really changes and where they see themselves as the paragon of perfection.
Perfect. Okay, so where do you see where do you see things like ghosts and fairies and that kind of realm? Where does this fit into all that?
Okay, my apologies. This keeps getting weird here, right? Psychic octopuses. It turns out, trust me, this will come around to answering your question.
Okay.
It turns out that of all animals, many animals display psychic abilities that are far more powerful than those of human beings, at least in our society. I mean, dogs, horses, even parrots have displayed much higher levels of ESP than humans in laboratory tests. It turns out that the octopus is the most psychic creature that we know of, the most psychic animal and far more psychic than humans. I go into a case of Paul the octopus, who had an 85% success rate in predicting the outcome of sports games, around about 2010 or so, I think. There was this octopus in captivity in Germany who was subjected to ESP tests and had an 85% success rate in, lifting the right lid off of two containers, each bearing the flag of two competing sports teams, successfully guessing the outcome of soccer games that were going to be held, showing, precognitive ESP. And so the question I ask in this book is if those are the abilities of a 2-year-old octopus, this creature only lived to be 2 years old, what would the psychic capabilities of a superorganism in the future oceans of Earth be, right? So there was a study done by tens of scientists that, to make a long story short, suggested that the octopus is not a creature consistent with the current level of biological complexity on Earth, that somehow the octopus, from an evolutionary biology standpoint, is anomalous. Either it came in the manner of panspermia from some other planet or moon in our solar system, or probably our solar system, a place like Europa or Titan. Frozen octopus eggs came here on a comet or an asteroid and seeded the Earth's ocean with this organism. Or, and this is the possibility that I run away with in the book, the octopus is from the future. That the octopus, in terms of its shape-shifting capabilities, in terms of its decentralized intelligence, where it has a brain inside each of its tentacles, in terms of its extremely playful behavior and its almost scheming mentality, it is a more complex life form than what ought to have been able to evolve in the current geological epoch of Earth. And so,
right. So it went through a slip, basically, and then got away from the slip to where it multiplied, and then now we have it before we should have it.
It came through one of these hyperdimensional vortices in the ocean. And either the octopus, okay, look, maybe something evolved from the octopus that we don't know about. Again, we've explored 5% of the world's oceans. We have no idea what's down there. I think by design. I mean, is it really an accident that NASA has a Google map of like every planet in our solar system, but has
ocean floor,
95% of our own ocean? You know, something's wrong there. And I think what's wrong there is that there's an intelligence in the ocean that's not human. And so what I suggest in this book is that, I mean, I actually don't think it's the octopus itself. I think the octopus sort of came along for the ride, and probably there's something down there that is to the octopus what we are to monkeys, right? I mean, like a monk, you know, they're primates like we are, but the octopus is the equivalent of a circus monkey to whatever this thing is. And this thing is tremendously psychic, like, you know, like the octopus is, but at a much higher level of competence. And if you look back at what the mediums in the late 19th century were able to accomplish, you look at Daniel Douglas Hume, who was able to levitate himself feet off of the ground, like several feet off of the ground, or levitate tables in the presence of scientists of the caliber of Sir William Crookes at the British Society for Psychical Research. Or you look at someone like Giuseppe Palladino, who could manifest ectoplasmic egregores inside of cabinets, right? Partially formed people with faces, limbs. She was able to materialize hands on seance tables. I mean, you know, people think of the Addams Family. It's ridiculous, right? But yeah, she was able to materialize hands that would go around the seance table and shake hands with the participants there. And again, all of this was done by the British SPR under extremely rigorous scientific controls imposed by the Cambridge and Oxford scientists who belonged to that organization, or people like, you know, William James in the United States, who were also members of that organization. So if we have humans that are capable of this kind of psychokinetic materialization that can form ectoplasmic egregores or tulpas, what is this superorganism capable of? And I look at various aspects of the close encounter phenomenon, like, for example, the Men in Black. And I suggest that they are psychokinetic materializations that when Carl Jung wrote in his 1950s book on flying saucers, that it's possible that, you know, the close encounter phenomenon is actually a type of psychic projection. He was onto something. That doesn't account, that theory, which John Keel picked up on, doesn't account for the whole range of close encounters, but it does account for some of the more bizarre aspects of close encounters. with, for example, entities like the Men in Black, who, if you really look at these cases, the devil's in the detail, they're not, operatives of any government agency. I mean, these guys, they materialize in people's dark attics and have the smell of sulfur. And, they're like the demonic entities that would manifest in people's bedrooms in the Middle Ages, these incubi and succubi and so forth. That's the kind of entities they are. And they don't talk like certainly not like any government agent, but they don't talk like any intelligent alien would either. They almost have a psychic automatism to them, as if somebody is in a mesmeric state, trying to maintain the mental image of these things that it's projecting, right? And that the reason these Men in Black stutter and repeat themselves and say such absurd things and seem to run out of energy is because they're mental images that are being projected. They are ectoplasmic materializations. And so, yeah, I go through
the black helicopters might be in that realm as well, because like I know they appear, disappear. There's a lot of yeah,
and I go into these cases of cloaked entities, invisible entities, which have been encountered on the Skinwalker Ranch. The UFO researcher Bruce Maccabee, his wife encountered one of them while she was deer hunting one day in the backyard of their property, in the backwoods of their property. They are these, they're referred to as predators because they look like the thing in the movie Predator. They're these invisible entities that are often associated with UFO sightings that are only detectable because they kind of distort what's behind them as they move. They kind of like pixelate the background behind them, but they're otherwise transparent and invisible. And it occurred to me looking at these cases that there's at least a certain subset of close encounters that are attributable to a being, to a type of intelligence that does not need to appear as a UFO, right? I mean, think about it. If something is invisible, if something can make itself completely invisible,
right,
that thing doesn't need to show up as a flying saucer or a flying triangle. It could show up as anything. And so that intelligence is a shapeshifter. It is presenting itself in the guise of many of the different forms that UFOs take, that the UFOs of the breakaway civilization take. It, for example, mimics grays. In the book, I go into a distinction between two types of grays. I think that there are grays that have been seen in tandem with nordics, working in conjunction with nordics, who are biological robots. They're androids that take care of some of the grittier aspects of abductions on behalf of the nordics. They work for the nordics. They're biological robots. But there are other quote unquote grays that shapeshift back and forth into owls. And I think these are ectoplasmic materializations, and they are in a chameleon-like fashion mimicking or
but what's their motive then? Okay, I get the motive of the Nordic, their hybridization program, where like I mean, actually sometimes don't really get that. It's like, if they think we're so inferior, why are they using our genetics? But unless theirs has gone as far as it can go, and they're doing some other kind of weird hybridization where they're making reptilians or who knows what. But what is this other, the ectoplasmic, what is their motivation? Like, why turn into why turn into a ghost or whatever, or a fake an owl, or a fake or not a fake, a sub other kind of gray? Like, what's their motive?
So I think that this trickster is trying to give us clues to its motive, to its aim, in terms of the symbolism it uses to manifest. I don't think it's incidental that this thing takes the shape of owls in particular, mantids in particular, and that it functions very much like an octopus. I think that these are clues to its own nature. So, for example, I go into the mantid cases, And I analyzed them in terms of an essay on mantids by one of the founders of the Surrealist movement, a guy named Roger Calois, who was a colleague of André Breton and the early French Surrealists. And Calois does a phenomenological analysis of the praying mantis. You can find this in a book called The Edge of Surrealism. It's got his essay on the praying mantis in there, and also an essay that he wrote on Lucifer. And I think these two are very closely connected, because the praying mantis throughout the history of folklore was associated with the devil. It was called the deceiver, menteuse, and also the prego diabla, the prey to the devil, were alternate names for the praying mantis. And there are aspects of the praying mantis, in particular, its ability to function in a decapitated state, which call to mind tantric symbolism. If you look at the way that the Kali manifests as the Mahavidyas, when Kali severs her own head, right? And she manifests as these other goddess figures. The kind of egolessness that's soliciting in us is, I think, related to why this superorganism manifests in the symbolism of mantids. And mantids, very much like octopuses, are also shapeshifters. Mantids are masters of mimicry. They appear as certain plants, they appear as leaves, as flowers, in order to camouflage themselves in nature. And through a phenomenology of the mantid as an organism, and also of the various characteristics of owls, like the unique, ocular capacities of owls, their tremendous hearing, their ability to hunt in the night as stealth predators.
Be silent, yeah.
Silent and extremely perceptive in the dark. They are eyes in the dark. And there's a whole history of symbolism involving the owl, from its association with bad luck, because the owl was on the tails side of the Athenian coins. It had Athena on the head, and the owl was on the tail. So the owl got associated with bad luck, misfortune, all the way to its association with witches. The Roman word for owl, strix, is the same word for witch in the Latin of the Roman Empire. So I go through all the symbolism, and I try to piece together what it is this trickster is trying to tell us about itself by using the symbolism of owls and of mantids in order to engage us. And ultimately, I think what it involves is an attempt to restructure human consciousness in a way that will unleash our creative potential, that will, liberate us from the strictures that have been imposed on us psychically and sociologically by this time-traveling breakaway civilization. That in effect, what this trickster is trying to do is catalyze a new phase of human evolution.
Okay, awesome. So then that brings me back to that kind of means that, okay, the New World Order or the very old order. I like how you put that in your, because it's like, it's not new. You were just maybe seeing it more now. But so I guess, is it like, what's happening right now? Like, why are these things like, particularly since the 1950s on to now, like, why is the phenomenon hyping up? Like, how is this gonna, how do you think this is gonna, like, when you have when you have the Nordic type breakaway civilization messing with this other trickster type entities, like, I mean, we don't know, we're not psychic, we can't 100% tell the future, but like, what's the scenario that you think that how this is gonna break down?
Yeah, the reason that it has stepped up the way that it has since the 1950s is because we're approaching the technological singularity. This is something I've written about in my other books. If you map out the history of human technological development, it's not a straight line. It's straight incline. It's an exponential curve, right? Where it starts out very slow, there's minimal development over a very long period of time. And as you get into, you know, the 1600s, 1700s, it starts to become a steeper curve. And then finally, it ends in a spike, 30 years, mapping various convergent advancements in technology. What that means is that thus far, we've been able to extrapolate from past technological developments and the way they've restructured society to future points in our developmental trajectory. I mean, that's the history of science fiction. All of our science fictional visions of a future society transformed by technology, from Sir Francis Bacon in the 1600s onward to, you know, H.G. Wells and Aldous Huxley, it's all based on being able to extrapolate from some point along that developmental curve to some other point in the future. There's a limit to that. When you hit the spike, what the spike means, translated from the graph into, you know, sociology, is that whatever development takes place after that point is inconceivable to the human mind, because the human mind will have been altered at that point, right? We will have so transformed ourselves through these technological innovations that we can't even really conceive of what would happen after this singularity or the spike. And the reason that the UFO phenomenon has increased in its intensity since the 1950s, or let's say over the course of the 20th century, and the reason why we're starting to get these steps toward disclosure now, is because the technological singularity is imminent. And it will give us capabilities comparable to those of the pilots of UFOs. So, if you've had these two factions going back all the way through history, and I think, I argue in this book, the Titanic faction, the Ashuras, the Titans, the rebel Atlanteans, the Atlanteans who rebelled against the Order of Olympus, if these people are aligned with this trickster from the future, maybe they even summoned it into the past through one of these hyperdimensional vortices. If these titanic enlightening figures, these defenders of human progress, are aligned with this intelligence from the future, then what we're going to see within the next 30 years is some final confrontation between the two sides, where we are the deciding factor in this tug of war, right? We, humanity, terrestrial humanity, are going to be put in a position where we have to choose either to retreat into a position of servitude and obedience to an eternally fixed order governed by gods and overlords, whether, you know, we choose to submit ourselves yet again to a hierarchical caste society of the kind that I think we had for most of human history. I mean, I think the pharaonic state in Egypt and the caste system in ancient India are just echoes and shadows of a system that was vastly more ancient and was governed by these Anunnaki for thousands upon thousands, of tens of thousands of years. Who knows, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. And so our choice is whether we want to allow ourselves to be regressed back into that, whether, you know, we should basically concede and allow these overlords to disrupt our advance toward the technological singularity and dismantle our advanced industrial civilization and forcibly regress us into an agrarian, neo-feudal caste society that putatively embodies cosmic order and harmony. That's what they'll tell us, that, you know, there won't be poverty and everybody will be taken care of, and, you know, your great ancestors will look over you again and you know, take care of you and all that. And we just basically submit like a herd of cattle. Or we can choose to resist. And I think that there are these titanic forces, there are these rebel
so it's like the Titans and the Olympians. It's like,
it has
to repeat itself.
Atlanteans, whatever. There's this rebel faction within the breakaway civilization itself. They also have time travel capability and so forth, but they're a minority. They're dissidents, and they can't solve the problem for us. We're the ones who have to decide what, you know, path we want to take, and, you know, what we want to align ourselves with. Do we want to align ourselves with this regressive, frankly backwards traditionalist mentality, or do we want to align ourselves with creative evolution and the force of progress and development? And if that's the case, then we need to be prepared to fight a resistance struggle, against some very tall odds.
Yeah.
David and Goliath.
Kind of feels like at this point, it feels like you're bringing arrows to a gun war, or, guns to a drone war, or,
Look, give me liberty or give me death. That's my bottom line, right? I mean, the slogan of the American Revolution, live free or die. Like the New Hampshire license plate says, right? Live free or die.
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, there's way worse things than death, and slavery is one of them.
Especially if you're dealing with beings who, as I suggest in this book, toward the end of chapter 6, have a psychotronic technology that messes with us even after we die. These bastards are capable of reaching into what the Tibetans call the bardo state and grabbing people in the vulnerable transition between death and rebirth, and messing with them for various purposes, either in order to harness energy or to cause.
Have you heard of that concept where they put you through I've heard of this a couple of times, where it's like when you die, there's the light itself is some sort of electroplasmic thing that puts you into the reincarnation loop. It's like that is the prison, the internal prison, that whereas if you go to the stillness, something else happens. I don't know
Don't go into the light.
Don't go into the light. That's opposite of what they say, right? But I think about that a lot.
It's a psychic magnet.
That's actually the ultimate question of this existence for you're as an individual. When I die, should I go to the light or not?
Right.
It's interesting because
the case of Betty Andreasson is very important in this respect. I won't go on about it at length here, but it's in the book. Betty Andreasson was a housewife who in the 1960s was abducted and basically taken to meet God, taken by Nordic angels and told by God that Jesus Christ would be coming back soon. And if you look carefully at the abduction case of Betty Andreasson, as the researcher who's written about it at length himself noted, it bears a lot of resemblance to certain features of near-death experiences. And this has been studied by a number of researchers, including Kenneth Ring. Raymond Fowler is the guy who studied the Andreasson case in depth and noted that comparison. But Kenneth Ring is another researcher who came from out of the field of parapsychology, NDE studies, and noted all these comparisons between NDEs and abduction experiences. And so, yeah, Betty Andreasson wound up in front of the light. They took her to the light source, as it were. And the light source said, don't worry, Jesus Christ is coming back soon. And these Nordics who were engaging with her, who had little grays working as robots for them, were supposedly the angels. They were the Elohim. And they told her, by the way, that these grays, what they do is they're watchers who write down everything that we do. They're like drones who are making a record of our lives so that we can be judged in the future. My response is, well, I'm sorry, but who died and made you God? Right. That you're going to, make a record of everything I did and then play it back to me in some kind of life review. Go to hell. I'll decide what my future life is going to be. Right. And so, yeah, I get into this in the book, that the manipulation of the disembodied state between death and rebirth as compared to what it should be naturally, the interference in the bardo state, as the Tibetans would put it, on the part of these beings. And so, especially if that's the case, then there are definitely things worse than death. And we should, while we're alive, struggle for creating a freer society where we're not subjected to this kind of manipulation.
Yeah, I agree. I really do. I mean, and it also makes you start thinking about the dream state and what's going on with that and what that is. But that's that's a whole other bag of whistles. That's a whole other subject that I like to dive into. But I mean, I don't know. The first time I ever was going to try a psychedelic mushroom, I thought I was just going to see some pretty colors or something. And they were passing around a bag, and I got a bag of mushrooms, and I thought okay, well, they were then passing around some peanut butter. So I was like, I'm just going to try one of these before I get the peanut butter. So I ended up eating the whole bag because I didn't think they tasted that bad. And I didn't know anything about grams, or I don't know I took 12 grams of mushrooms. So I had an ego death, to say the least. And it's weird. Like once I left, I did see a bunch of fairies and stuff, but after I left my body and I left the planet and the earth, everything digitized, and then I was no longer in something effable. I was no longer in something explainable, and there was no personification. Like I don't say God because that's a personification in a way, and I don't say heaven or anything like that because that's like a place. This was more like I was electricity, and I was a fragment, an element of electricity. And when I hear a lot of this stuff, I think it's more like that is the computational cosmos. And yeah, like everything else is this matter of messing with your own sovereignty, right? It's like this giant, like I said to you before we started, like the one thing you have in common with whether there's any kind of manifestation of anything, a trickster or a Nordic or a gray, it doesn't matter. If there's anything in front of you, the one thing that you and that thing have in common is that you both exist at this time right now. And like ultimately, yeah, there are things worse than death. Like you don't concede to anybody for anything. That's how I kind of feel. But anyway, it was.
I agree with you more. And there is a place in this book where I briefly do discuss psychedelics, and in particular DMT as a way to hack the matrix and to access the quantum, the higher reference level of the quantum computational cosmos. And interestingly enough, sometimes when people use DMT and how could I put it? Extricate themselves from this program running inside of the cosmic matrix in that cyberspace, in that, psychedelic cyberspace, they'll see reptilians and other,
machine elves and mantids, a lot of mantid beings.
Right. And so I think what's going on is that we are accessing cyberspace that those beings already regularly have access to. They've mastered that kind of technology. It's a technology, really. I mean, psychedelics are also a technology.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, it also makes me kind of think about the different planes of what really is the astral plane. That's a whole other, yeah. But okay, Jason, before we just make everybody, I don't know how long this thing has been. It's been a long time. So like I don't
half almost now, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So like that's about as much as people can take in one bite, I would say.
I agree.
Yeah. So that's I do want to talk to you again sometime, because like I could talk to you forever about this stuff. It's a fantastic book, you guys. Like this is the best UFO book I've ever read, and I've read it. I've been obsessed with this subject for like 15 years. I mean, this is like you put together all the things that I've thought. Like you just put it all together. Like this is the. I don't know. I mean,
coming from you, that's very high praise, Nikki. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you did an amazing piece of work. It's gonna be a classic, Jason. This is a classic. This is amazing. So keep it up.
If it doesn't unduly terrify people, I mean, look, I'm sorry to have to break it to you all this way, but really we're running out of time. So at this point, honesty is really required. And this is a brutally honest look at Close Encounters, comprehensive and honest.
Yep. And I like how you don't just like bullshit around about like, okay, yeah, I mean, and they could come from this planet. And no, you go into like, okay, what's like, let's get real here. Like what's really going on? Like, let's stop playing around with the ifs. And I appreciate that. It's much needed. This is great. So, okay. So tell us a little bit real quick about where people can find you and about like what's your new plans for your channel is going to be and that going forward.
Well, new plans for my channel. Eventually, I hope to launch a not just a podcast. I mean, maybe I'll make it available in audio form as well, but eventually a show. But that may take some time to do that. But yeah, people should subscribe to my YouTube channel in anticipation of original content, hopefully in the not too distant future. As far as where they can, find my books, They're all available on Amazon, but there are also links to them specifically on my website, jasonrezajorjani.com. There's a books link and a link to my YouTube there. And so that's probably the best place to, find the various platforms that I'm on, Facebook, Twitter, and so forth. jasonrezajorjani.com.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. That's been so fun, and we'll have to do it again sometime, and it was great.
Absolutely, Nikki. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, cool.